Some life situations are so unforeseen that they leave an indelible mark on our hearts and minds. Such was the day when Logan unexpectedly entered my bedroom. It was a typical afternoon. Martin, my husband, was at the office as usual, and Logan, his son from a previous marriage, had recently returned home following a difficult breakup. Since his return, we had been treading carefully around each other, wary of reigniting past conflicts. I was in my room, trying on a dress for an upcoming event, when I decided to change into something different. I was in the midst of changing, standing there in just my underwear, when the door opened. Logan paused mid-sentence, his eyes widening as he froze in the doorway. I gasped and instinctively grabbed the nearest object to cover myself. "Logan, I'm so sorry," he stammered, his face flushing crimson, and then he turned away so hastily that he nearly stumbled. The door slammed shut, leaving me standing there, my face burning with humiliation and a strange, unidentifiable feeling. We both desperately wanted to forget that moment, yet it seemed impossible. Logan's sudden return to the house had caught me off guard. Martin had suggested it without consulting me, but I wasn't entirely surprised. My husband had a habit of making decisions without considering the consequences for others. "Logan needs a place to stay for a while," he had stated during dinner one night, barely glancing up from his phone. "You don't mind, right?" Of course, I did mind, but I didn't voice my objection. Logan was polite, albeit distant, and we had always maintained a cordial, if somewhat superficial, relationship. However, his presence served as a constant reminder of Martin's past, casting an unspoken strain over our interactions. At 25, Logan was strikingly handsome. He possessed the same black hair and strong jawline as Martin, but his eyes were softer and more contemplative. He carried himself with a calm assurance that made his previous grief seem even more unexpected. "He cheated on me," he had revealed over dinner one night while Martin was absent. I had tried to keep the conversation light, but Logan's bluntness had taken me aback. "Oh, Logan, I'm so sorry," I murmured, truly shocked. "Don't worry," he said with a shrug. "It happens." This particular incident occurred on a Wednesday afternoon. Martin was at the office, and Logan was supposed to be out running errands. I was in my bedroom, looking through dresses for an upcoming charity event. The dress I had on didn't fit as well as I remembered, so I took it off and tossed it on the bed. Standing there in my bra and underwear, I was searching the closet for something else when the door opened. "Charlotte, did you see?" Logan's words trailed off abruptly, as his gaze swept over the room. I froze, clutching a hanger, as his attention shifted from me to the floor. His face turned scarlet, and he spun around so quickly that he almost knocked over a lamp. "I'm sorry," he stuttered before retreating out of the room. I gasped and quickly grabbed a robe to cover myself. The door slammed shut, and I stood there, my pulse pounding as I realized what had just happened. For the remainder of the day, I avoided Logan. I stayed in my room, pretending to be busy, but I couldn't concentrate on anything. The image of his startled expression was seared into my memory, and every time I thought about it, a wave of humiliation washed over me. Dinner that night was tense. The air between us was heavy with unspoken tension. "Did you do those errands today?" I asked, attempting to sound nonchalant. "Yeah," he replied, without looking up from his plate. Martin glanced between us, oblivious to the discomfort. "I urged Logan to take some time off and figure out what he wants to do next," I said. "That's a great idea," I remarked, though my tone was a bit too loud. Logan eventually looked up, his expression inscrutable. "I appreciate your hospitality," he said. "I won't stay longer than necessary." "Don't be ridiculous," Martin responded, waving his hand dismissively. Your family. The days that followed were painful. Every conversation with Logan felt strained, as if we were both tiptoeing around an invisible boundary. He avoided being alone with me, which I initially thought was for the best. Despite my efforts to forget the incident, I found myself thinking about it more often than I cared to admit. One evening, I noticed him looking at me from across the living room. His stare was fleeting, yet it lingered long enough to make my stomach flutter. I quickly glanced away, trying not to notice, but the moment stayed with me. It wasn't long before I noticed subtle changes in his behaviour. He started coming home earlier and spending more time in the common areas of the house. One night, I caught him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter and holding a glass of water. Couldn't sleep? I asked in a casual tone. He shrugged. Something like that. We stood there in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator. He then spoke quickly and quietly. About the other day, I'm sorry, he said. You don't need to apologize, I replied swiftly. I shouldn't have been in such a compromising position. He said, his gaze fixed on the floor. It was an accident. I explained softly, let's forget about it. He looked up, his expression suggesting that he wasn't entirely convinced. The pivotal moment occurred one evening when Martin called to say he would be working late. Logan entered the living room, as I was flipping through a magazine. He stopped at the doorway, as if deciding whether to stay or leave. Want to watch something? He eventually inquired, gesturing to the television. Sure, I said, tossing the magazine aside. He sat down next to me, and we watched in silence. However, the air between us was charged with an unspoken tension. When our hands accidentally touched as we reached for the remote, I felt a jolt of electricity pass through me. He immediately drew his hand back, his cheeks flushing. Sorry, he mumbled. It's okay, I said, my voice trembling slightly. The moment passed, but it left behind a lingering sense of something unspoken, a potential that neither of us dared to acknowledge. A few nights later, I found myself awake well past midnight. The house was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I got out of bed and went into the kitchen to make some tea, only to find Logan already there. He was sitting at the table, holding a mug of coffee, his gaze distant. The warm illumination from the under-cabinet lights cast shadows across his face, making him appear older than his 25 years. Couldn't sleep either? I inquired, leaning against the doorframe. He looked up, surprised, and gave me a small smile. Something like that. I got myself a cup of tea and sat down across from him. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he unexpectedly broke the silence. Have you ever felt stuck? He inquired, his voice soft but steady. Stuck? I repeated, tilting my head. You know, just going through the motions, he remarked, peering into his coffee. Doing what others expect of you, but never truly living for yourself. His words struck a chord deep within me. I paused before responding. Yes, I said quietly. More times than I'd like to admit. He looked up at me, his gaze probing. What will you do about it? I sighed. I've spent so much time putting others first, Martin, this house. I guess I never really considered what I wanted. Logan's stare remained unwavering. Perhaps it's time you did, he said. The weight of his remarks hung in the air between us, presenting a challenge that I wasn't sure I was ready to face. After that night, things between us began to change. It started small, a shared gaze that lasted a bit too long, a brief touch of hands as we passed each other in the corridor. One afternoon, I was in the garden pruning roses when Logan joined me. Need some help? He asked, crouching down next to me. Do you know how to trim a rose bush? I teased. He smiled and said that he didn't. I chuckled and handed him the scissors. Well, I hope you don't kill it. As we worked side by side, I felt a sense of comfort that I hadn't experienced in years. Logan's presence was surprisingly relaxing and grounding. You're good at this, I observed as I watched him gently clip a branch. You think so? He said with a shrug. No, really, I insisted. You have a good eye for detail. He looked at me, his gaze softening. Maybe I learned it by observing you, he said. The compliment took me by surprise, leaving me momentarily stunned. Later that evening, as we were cleaning up from dinner, our hands brushed as we reached for the same dish. The contact was brief, but it sent a shock through me that I couldn't shake. Logan apologized hastily, snatching his hand back. I'm sorry. That's okay, I said, but my voice trembled. He paused for a moment before speaking. Charlotte, he murmured, his voice low. I looked up at him, my heart racing. Yes? He hesitated, then said, nothing. Never mind. But the tightness in his voice revealed everything I needed to know. Emily, my best friend, was the first to notice the difference in me. She came over one day for coffee, her sharp eyes missing nothing as we talked in the living room. You seem distracted lately, she added, her tone light but probing. Do I? I asked, pretending ignorance. Yes, she responded, leaning forward slightly. Logan has also been hanging around more than normal. Is everything all right? Of course, I said quickly, but my voice sounded too bright. Emily cast me a knowing look. Charlotte, I've known you for years. I can tell when you're hiding something. I argued that there was nothing to tell, despite the fact that her comments unsettled me. That night, after Emily had left and Martin had gone to his study, I found Logan in the living room scrolling through TV channels. Mind if I join you? I inquired, settling down on the couch near him. Not at all, he replied with an easy grin. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the distance between us feeling both too close and not close enough. Finally, Logan placed down the remote and turned to face me. May I ask you something? He spoke tentatively. Of course, I responded, even though my heart was pounding. Do you ever regret marrying my father? He asked. I was taken aback by the question and hesitated before answering. I don't regret anything, I explained thoroughly. But sometimes, I wonder if I made the right decision. Logan nodded, his expression serious. I've been thinking a lot about options lately, he murmured, his gaze fixed on mine. The room felt abnormally quiet, the air between us thick with unspoken whispers. Before I could think about it, I reached out and placed my hand on his. Logan, I started, but the rest of the words stuck in my throat. He leaned in, his eyes searching mine. You don't need to say anything, he whispered. The moment was suspended in time, like a delicate bubble about to burst, but neither of us made a move to break it. When Sierra, Logan's ex-girlfriend, reappeared, Logan and I were on the verge of something that we both knew was dangerous. She arrived at the house unexpectedly one day, her pristine appearance a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind. Logan, she murmured sweetly as she walked inside. I have missed you. What are you doing here? Logan's tone was apprehensive. I'm staying here for a while, he said. I wanted to talk, she told him, smiling brightly. I remained in the kitchen, out of sight, but within earshot, as they talked. I've been thinking about us, Sierra said. I made a mistake, Logan. I want to fix things. Logan answered firmly, there's nothing to fix. Don't be like this, she urged. We were good together. As their conversation progressed, a knot of envy grew in my gut. Logan found me that evening in the garden, tending to the flowers. He was motionless for a moment before speaking. Sierra isn't staying, he added firmly. I didn't respond, but simply nodded, despite the fact that my tone betrayed my relief. He moved closer, his presence warm and steady. You don't have to worry about her, he said softly. Before I could react, he reached out to gently tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. The gesture was so delicate and intimate that it left me breathless. That night, the thin thread that had been holding us back snapped. After Logan's gentle reassurance in the garden, I felt a pull that I could no longer resist. The boundaries between what was acceptable and what wasn't became increasingly blurred, eventually disappearing altogether. It started with a lingering touch and a hidden gaze, but it wasn't long before the secrecy became part of the allure. Every shared moment carried a risk, yet with each one, our relationship grew stronger. One morning, when Martin left early for work, I was in the kitchen sipping my coffee. Logan emerged in the doorway, his hair and t-shirt slightly rumpled. Morning, he replied, his voice still thick with sleep. Morning, I said, my heart racing. He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, his gaze fixed on me. You awake early, he said. So are you, I said, attempting to seem nonchalant. For a minute, we stood in silence, the tension between us palpable. Then he carefully crossed the room and sat next to me at the small breakfast table. Charlotte, he stated in a hushed voice. I looked up at him, my heart pounding. Yes? His fingers brushed over mine, sending a thrill through me. I can't stop thinking about you, he said. Logan, I began, but he simply shook his head. Don't say it's wrong, he spoke quietly. We both know it doesn't feel like that. I wanted to argue, to say something that would bring us back from the brink, but instead, I let him grasp my hand, and the warmth of his touch silenced any objections I might have had. Logan and I became experts at deception as the days turned into weeks. We found ways to be alone without arousing suspicion, like sharing a moment in the garden, or spending a peaceful hour in the study when Martin was away. Every snatched minute was amazing, yet it was also exhausting. The constant fear of discovery loomed over us, threatening to ruin everything with the slightest mistake. Emily, always perceptive, noticed the small changes in my behaviour. One day, she stopped by unexpectedly while I was walking down the stairs. Charlotte, she said, her eyes narrowing. You've been avoiding me. I've just been busy, I immediately explained, attempting a grin. Are you too busy to see your best friend? She inquired, her tone light yet inquisitive. I hesitated, uncertain of how to answer. It isn't like that. Then what is it? She pressed. Because something is going on, and I think I know what it is. Her comment sent shivers down my spine, but I tried to maintain a neutral expression. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Emily's stare remained on me for a second before she sighed. Just take care, Charlotte. Whatever you're doing isn't worth losing everything. Her admonition stayed with me long after she left. Sierra's presence increased, much to my dismay. She arrived at the house suddenly one evening, her cheerful grin concealing the calculated purpose of her visit. I thought I'd bring supper, she explained, holding out a bag of takeout. That's thoughtful, I remarked, attempting to conceal my anger. Logan's reply was cautious yet courteous. Thank you, Sierra, but you didn't have to do that. I wanted to, she admitted pleasantly. I've missed us. The atmosphere in the room was overwhelming, so I excused myself, and went to the kitchen on the pretext of preparing the meal. From there, I listened to their conversation, each word twisting my stomach. Sierra offered to try again, her tone almost imploring. Logan said firmly, "There's nothing to try." Her laughter was brittle. "You're hiding something. I can feel it." I held my breath and prayed Logan wouldn't falter. "What I do isn't your affair," he continued, his tone chilly. Sierra eventually departed, and the relief I felt was momentary. One evening, Martin came home earlier than planned. Logan and I almost got caught in the study, where we were supposedly reviewing some papers, a flimsy pretext for the real reason we were there. When the sound of the front door opening startled us, I quickly moved away from Logan. "Charlotte." "Logan?" Martin called out. I said, my voice tight. "We're in here." Martin emerged in the doorway seconds later, his brow furrowing as he surveyed the scene. "What are you both doing?" Logan was just helping me organize some old files, I spoke hurriedly, waving to the mound of papers on the desk. Martin's gaze lingered on us for a moment before nodding. "Dinner is ready." Logan looked at me immediately after Martin left. His countenance was strained. "That was close," he said. "Too close," I agreed, my heart still pounding. The constant need for concealment began to take its toll on me. During one of our late-night discussions, Logan became agitated and expressed his dissatisfaction with the situation. "I can't keep doing this," he said, pacing the living room. "Logan, please," I said, attempting to soothe him. "I'm sick of faking," he muttered, his voice rising. "Of sneaking around and acting as if nothing is going on when everything is." I stood and put my hand on his arm. "We don't have a choice," I said. "There is always a choice," he stated, his stare sharp. "You just have to decide whether I'm worth it." His comments left me breathless, but I couldn't give him the answer he desired, not yet. During one of our coffee sessions, Emily's concerns escalated. She dropped her cup down with a clatter and leaned forward, her expression stern. "Charlotte, are you having an affair?" she asked bluntly. The directness of her question surprised me into stillness. "You don't have to lie," she continued. "I've seen the way you look at him." I gulped hard and struggled to find the words. "Emily, She raised her hand to stop me. "I don't need the details. Just consider the danger you're taking for him." Her remarks hit deep, leaving me unsettled long after she left. Sierra's resolve reached its peak when she confronted Logan directly. I overheard their quarrel in the driveway, and her voice was shrill with accusation. "I know what you've been doing," she said. "You're hiding something, and I'll find out what it is." Logan responded calmly but firmly, "Sierra, you should go." "Not until I know the truth," she snapped. The confrontation triggered a flood of terror in me. If Sierra knew the truth, everything would be destroyed. Everything began to crumble the day Sierra decided to escalate. She cornered me in the garden when Logan was away, her manner both sweet and harsh. "Lovely roses," she remarked, stroking her fingers over a blossom as if admiring it. "Thank you," I said wearily, not trusting the gleam in her eyes. She turned to me, her grin brittle. "You know, I've been thinking a lot about Logan recently. He's been different, reserved, secretive. Do you know anything about that?" I faked a grin. "Logan has been through a lot recently. I'm sure he just needs time." Sierra cocked her head, her face becoming frigid. "Maybe, or perhaps there's more to it." "I'm not sure what you mean," I responded, my voice calm despite the growing terror in my chest. She moved closer, her eyes penetrating. "You should be aware of any potential issues. I won't overlook any potential problems. Logan deserves better than to get involved with whatever this is. I didn't answer, but her comments lingered in the air long after she had departed. Later that evening, Emily arrived at the house unexpectedly. Her expression was turbulent. "Charlotte," she murmured, moving past me into the living room. "We need to talk." I closed the door, bracing myself for what was to come. "Emily, this isn't a good time," I said. "Too bad," she said, turning to face me. "I tried to give you space, but I can't keep quiet any longer." "Emily, please," I said, but she shook her head. "No more excuses," she stated forcefully. "I know something is going on between you and Logan, and if I may ask, how long do you think it will take until Martin figures it out?" Her comments hit me hard. "You don't understand," I answered softly. "Then make me understand," she continued, her voice softening. "Charlotte, I'm your friend. But you're engaging in reckless behaviour that could potentially harm others." I collapsed onto the couch, tears welling up in my eyes. "I didn't mean for this to happen, but it did," I explained softly. "And now you have to decide what to do about it," Emily said. When I informed Logan about Emily's visit, he was furious. "Who does she think she is?" he snapped, pacing the living room. "She's my friend," I said hesitantly. "She doesn't understand," he remarked in a harsh tone. "Nobody does," I pleaded. "Logan, please." I got up to face him. "She's right. This can't go on forever." His eyes softened, but his fury remained visible. "Do you regret it?" he asked. The question took me off guard. "No," I replied honestly. "But that doesn't make things any less complicated." He moved closer, his voice low. "We can work it out together." For a moment, I wanted to believe him, but the weight of the truth was too heavy to ignore. Martin's discovery of cracks in our facade escalated the tension in the house. It began with little comments. He made casual remarks about Logan's prolonged presence, or my preoccupied mood. But his interest quickly evolved into mistrust. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, Martin's tone changed. "Logan, you've spent a lot of time here recently," he said, his stare keen. Logan paused, looking at me before speaking. "I've just been helping around the house," he said. "Helping out," Martin repeated, his tone sarcastic. "That's fascinating." I attempted a grin, hoping to ease the tension. "Logan has been a tremendous help with the garden," I said. Martin held my eyes for a second before returning his attention to Logan. "Maybe it's time for you to start looking for your own place," he said. Logan stiffened his jaw as the words hung in the air. "Perhaps," he said gently. Logan saw me in the study after dinner, his expression frustrated. "This isn't working," he remarked quietly but firmly. "I know," I said, my heart sinking. "I can't keep pretending," he said, his tone pleading. "I need more than this, just snatched moments and false fronts." "Logan, please," I pleaded with tears in my eyes. He moved closer, his hands gripping mine. "Come with me, Charlotte. Leave everything behind." His words jolted through me, but I couldn't force myself to respond. The weight of my obligations, my marriage, and the life I had built was too heavy to ignore. Before I could make a choice, Sierra reappeared, armed with more than just mistrust. She confronted Logan in the driveway, her shouting audible across the neighborhood. "I know what you've been doing," she said, her tone accusatory. Logan crossed his arms, maintaining a cool demeanor. "What exactly are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "I saw you with her." "Logan, I have proof," she said, her words like a dagger aimed directly at us, causing my heart to plummet. "If you try to deny it, I'll make sure everyone knows," Sierra said, her voice quivering with wrath. Logan didn't answer, but the damage had already been done. Back inside, Logan was pacing the kitchen, his look angry. "We need to do something," he said. "What do you mean?" I inquired, my voice wavering. "Sierra won't stop," he muttered, his jaw stiffening. "If we don't intervene, she'll ruin everything." "But how?" I asked, feeling helpless. "I'll talk to Greg," he stated firmly. "Logan, no," I said, terrified. "Greg is dangerous." "So is she," he answered as he exited the house. A terrible feeling descended in my chest. Logan returned late that night, his expression sad. The stiffness in his shoulders revealed everything I needed to know. The talk with Greg had not gone as expected. "What happened?" I inquired, my tone barely above a whisper. Logan slumped into the chair opposite me, rubbing his temples. "Greg knows about the situation," he admitted. The room felt as if it had chilled by 10 degrees. "What did he say?" I asked. "He threatened to tell Martin unless we leave," Logan said. I felt my breath catch. "Leave together?" He nodded. "It's the only way to stop him." For hours, I paced the living room, caught between loyalty and desire. Logan sat quietly, watching me with an intensity that added to the weight of my decision. "What about Martin?" I eventually asked, pausing to face him. "What about this life I've created?" I added. Logan crossed the room to stand in front of me. "What is your life, Charlotte?" he inquired, his voice quiet but forceful. "A life in which you're invisible and your happiness doesn't matter." His comment struck harder than I wanted to admit. "I can't just walk away," I explained, my voice shaking. "You can," he replied, cradling my face in his hands. "You just have to choose me." The decision was made for me before I could make one. The next morning, Martin met me in the kitchen, his face pale and his phone clasped tightly in his palm. "Charlotte," he said, his voice quivering with barely controlled rage. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" I froze, my thoughts whirling. "What exactly are you talking about?" He flung the phone onto the counter, and the screen was filled with text messages between Logan and me. "Don't lie to me," Martin yelled. "I've seen the texts, and I know what's been going on." I opened my mouth to answer, but no words emerged. "How long?" he shouted, his voice rising. "How long has this been happening?" I glanced down, reluctant to meet his eyes. "Martin, How long, Charlotte?" he yelled, pounding his fist against the counter. "Months," I muttered, tears flowing down my cheeks. His chuckle was sour and nearly nasty. "Months? You were building this life for us while I was away working." He trailed off, his voice cracking. Logan came into the room, his countenance tightening as he took in the scene. "Martin," he said, his voice calm yet strong. "This isn't all her fault." Martin turned on him, his rage misdirected. "Don't even try to defend her," he hissed. "You were supposed to be my son, yet you deceived me." Logan stated calmly, despite the tempest raging around him. "I didn't mean for this to happen, but I love her." "Love?" Martin repeated, his voice full of incredulity. "Do you think this is love? This is just selfishness." The conversation became heated, with accusations flying like knives. I attempted to intervene, but my words were drowned out by the growing tension between them. Martin eventually stated coldly and definitively, "Get out. Both of you, get out of my house." "Martin, please," I implored, but he turned away with a harsh grimace. "I don't want to hear it," he said. "You've made your choice." Logan and I packed our belongings quietly, the weight of our actions hanging in the air. As I took my bag to the car, I looked back at the house I had built with Martin and felt a twinge of sadness. "Are you sure about this?" I questioned Logan as we got into the car. He didn't respond right away, keeping his sight on the road ahead. "Are you?" I paused, the magnitude of what we were doing weighing on me like a heavy blanket. "I'm not sure," I admitted. My phone alerted me to a notification just as we approached the freeway. Sierra had sent a message. "I hope it was worth it," it said. When I clicked on the provided link to a social media post, my emotions quickly cooled. The post included screenshots of Logan's and my chats, as well as the nasty statement, "Some secrets cannot be kept forever." "She's told everyone," I muttered, my voice trembling. Logan looked across at me, his gaze hardening. "Let them talk," he said. "It doesn't matter anymore." But when the alerts started rolling in, I realized how much it did matter. The reaction was quick and harsh. Friends and relatives pulled away from me, their judgment harsh and merciless. Within days, Martin filed for divorce, cutting all ties and leaving me to rebuild my shattered life. Logan tried to be my support, yet he was unable to shield me from the turmoil. The weight of our decision began to show, and the fissures in our relationship were difficult to overlook. Logan glanced at me one evening, as we sat in the modest apartment we had rented. His mood was dark. "This isn't what you wanted," he remarked quietly. I stared at him, tears welling in my eyes. "It's not what you wanted either," I said. For a long time, we sat in silence, the weight of our decisions crushing down on us. Logan finally stood and headed for the door, pausing to look at me one more time. "I'll always care about you," he said. "But we can't keep doing this." With that, he was gone. In the months that followed, I attempted to piece my life back together. It was not easy. The criticism and censure from those around me served as constant reminders of my mistakes. But in the quiet moments, I felt a sense of clarity that I hadn't had in years. I started thinking about what I truly wanted, not for Martin or Logan, but for myself. Looking back, I realized that I couldn't undo the past, but I could learn from it. And perhaps, in time, I would find a way to move forward. The weeks after Logan left were the most difficult of my life. The apartment felt unbearably silent without him, and the weight of all I had lost weighed down on me relentlessly. Martin's absence, while expected, left a hollow pain. Friends I thought I could count on vanished, their judgment too harsh to conceal beneath polite conversation. But I couldn't afford to wallow. The initial steps of rebuilding were essential. I accepted a job at a local art supply store, where I spent my days surrounded by vivid paints and blank canvases, symbols of potential that had long gone untapped. Emily was the first to reach out. "I'm not here to lecture you," she explained over coffee one morning. Her voice was softer than it had been during our previous talk, yet her eyes retained a hint of caution. "I appreciate that," I said, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. "I just want to know," she continued. "Are you okay?" I paused, unsure how to respond. "I'm not sure," I said. "But I'm trying." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's all you can do." Months later, just as the wounds were beginning to heal, a knock on my door interrupted the fragile silence I had found. I opened it and was surprised to see Martin. He looked older, his face creased with tiredness, yet his presence still held the same weight, filling the small room with unspoken tension. "Can we talk?" he inquired, his tone unexpectedly calm. I stood aside, motioning for him to enter. He didn't sit, but stood at the window, looking down at the street. "I thought I'd hate you," he said quietly. "For all you did, for what you've ruined." I sat on the edge of the couch, my hands twisting in my lap. "Let me finish," he said, turning to face me. "I expected to despise you, but all I feel now is grief. Grief for us, for what we could have been." His comments struck harder than any accusation. I didn't mean to hurt him, but I had. "I didn't mean to," I explained, my voice wavering. "I understand," he continued. "But that doesn't make things any simpler." We talked for hours, recalling instances from our marriage that had gone unnoticed at the time, but now seemed crucial. By the time he left, our anger had subsided, and we had reached a sort of understanding. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Logan's departure created a new kind of void, one filled with questions I couldn't answer. Where had he gone? Did he regret what we had done? Did he think of me in the same way I thought of him? One evening, as I was closing up the art supply store, I found a note slipped behind my windshield wiper. My heart jumped as I recognized the handwriting. "Charlotte, I thought leaving would make things easier, but it hasn't. I still think about you and us. I wonder if you've moved on, whether you found the happiness I couldn't provide. I hope you did. Take care of yourself. Logan." The letter was unsigned, but it didn't need to be. I read it several times, each word evoking a range of emotions: relief, grief, and a little selfish hope that I hadn't been forgotten. Inspired by the letter, I started painting again. At first, it was just a way to fill the loneliness, a distraction from the chaos in my mind. But as the canvases filled with color, I felt a part of myself returning, a part that I hadn't even realized was missing. Emily walked by one day, and was intrigued by the sudden burst of creativity. "These are wonderful," she said, her eyes wide as she took in the paintings on the walls. "Thank you," I said with a hesitant grin. "You should exhibit these," she added, her voice demanding. "I don't know," I started, but she cut me off. "Don't doubt yourself, Charlotte. You've got something worth sharing." A year after Logan had left, fate brought him back into my life. I was at the opening of my own art exhibition when I noticed him across the room. He looked older, yet his magnetic attraction remained. "Charlotte," he whispered softly as he approached. "Logan," I replied, my heart pounding. For a while, we just stood there, the sounds of the room receding into the background. "You did it," he eventually murmured, indicating toward the paintings on the walls. "I had to," I said in a firm voice. He nodded at me, a faint smile flickering on the edges of his lips. "I am proud of you." We talked for hours that night, catching up on everything and nothing. By the time the gallery was empty, the air between us was filled with a peaceful understanding. Logan didn't stay in town, and his departure this time wasn't as painful as it had been before. Instead, it seemed like the end of a chapter, regardless of the sorrow it had caused. This was a chapter one would always cherish. As I stood in my studio, surrounded by the colors and textures of my new life, I knew that while the past would always be a part of me, it wouldn't define me. For the first time in years, I felt at peace with myself and the choices that had led me here. I had learned valuable lessons about love, desire, and the consequences of our actions. This story takes us on an emotional rollercoaster, exploring the complex web of relationships, secrets, and the far-reaching consequences of our choices. It challenges our traditional notions of right and wrong in matters of the heart, and forces us to confront the difficult decisions that can arise in the midst of powerful emotions. The relationship between the narrator and Logan defies the boundaries of what society typically deems acceptable. It makes us question the nature of love and attraction, and whether they can ever truly be controlled. What would you have done if you were in the narrator's position? How do we navigate the fine line between following our hearts and fulfilling our obligations? The story also highlights the importance of honesty and communication in relationships. If the characters had been more open about their feelings from the start, could they have avoided the painful fallout? Share your thoughts and experiences, and let's engage in a meaningful discussion about the choices we make and the impact they have on our lives and the lives of those around us.